Getting about those things again for tuning into yet another video. Infamous coming at you live from the West Coast yet again, San Jose, California. So let's get into this install. So I'm coming at you guys through voiceover because my neighbors had another little party, another karaoke night. So I wasn't able to record audio in the camera, but maybe this will still help you. Okay, so we got to remove that bracket off the rear. We got to have enough room because this part is really tight. So depending on your air breather, that might depend how that comes off. I have a Trask on my bike, so I went ahead and I removed it. If you guys want to see how I install it, you guys can wait towards the end. But pretty much we cut out the beginning of it as far as the air cleaner and what you got to get off, because that really depends on your bike and what you have on your bike. So we are just starting with the throttle body and the bracket on the rear, so we got to make enough room for us to fit our bits, our hex Allen head ball joint bits. I would say this would be the easiest way for you to do it. Allen head ball bits, sockets, whatever you want to call it. It just makes it a little bit easier to come at it at an angle. So we have to, of course, disconnect everything that's attached to the intake, which is your injectors and this airflow sensor. Pretty easy. It's a little locking mechanism with that gray tab. Pull it, pinch it, and it comes right out. And then this is where, of course, we get into the tight space. So normally, I guess you could remove your fuel tank, but I have, of course, my media device. I have other stuff on the fuel tank. I didn't want to disconnect all my components, all my things. So I went ahead and I just used a tennis ball to hold it up in place. You could do that. I know some of you guys have your gauges on your dash, so if you don't have to, if you don't want to remove the fuel tank, you just have to lift the bottom end, put something to support it. Tennis ball does the job. All right. So of course we have to disconnect the injectors. You can see the gray one is your front injector, and the black one is your rear. They're switched actually. So the connector you can see on the gray side is facing the back of the bike, or the left side of the bike, and then the connector on the rear cylinder, on the rear jug, is facing the right side of the fuel tank. That quick disconnect locking mechanism, you pinch it, pull it up, and it comes out. So this is where, of course, I was having a little bit of an issue removing the intake. I thought I'd be able to squeeze out the fuel rail and the injectors on the intake, and that just wasn't the case. I had to remove the fuel rail, or I actually loosened it, and I was able to kind of get it to come off of it. I think the best way to remove your intake would be to remove the injectors. So it's really quite an easy removal, or whatever you want to call it. Just pull it up. The only thing that's really holding it in place is some O-rings, and that's pretty much it. But somehow I managed to get it out without completely removing the injectors. And you can see you have all kinds of wires. I mean, these sensors get everywhere. You can see, and it's just you just got to wrestle with it. You got to take your time. Overall, the job itself took me about, I'd say, 3.5 hours, with everything. All right, so now we're going to take it on my workbench, and we are going to remove the parts and then put them on the SNS intake. You can see I'm using a scuff pad 600 grit to clean up the heads, and of course we use some paper towels to keep that dust and all that debris out. Alright, so now we got to transfer these parts over to this intake. Of course, this is the SNS. Looks pretty clean so far. So you guys saw that I was having trouble with the fuel rail right here, clearing the heads, or the rocker covers, or whatever you want to call them. So I think I'm going to leave it loose, and then once I have it inside and seated, I will tighten this down. So let's just go ahead and pull this out like so. Try to clean it up a little bit. Of course, these are your injectors. They're a little dirty. And then we also have to transfer the mass airflow right over here. What is this? I'm not sure. This is another sensor. So that's right in there. You can see it. We have to transfer that over here. So that's what we're going to do. That goes right here in this spot. Alright, so that's pretty much the only part where I actually recorded audio. The rest of this is going to be just voiceover because, like I said, the music, the neighbors, everything like that, I believe it was just getting a little bit annoying, so I just went ahead and you know, decided to just stop talking and let you know, the rest of the video be voiceover. Sorry. So of course we're transferring, like I said, the components from the OEM onto the SNS. Overall, better intake, better airflow. Of course, there's some restriction where it collects from the throttle body to the intake itself on the heads. So we're going to be, of course, just adding more airflow. And they claim, SNS claims, that you could actually get about, I'd say about 2 to 5 extra horsepower, maybe torque. But of course, you see me installing the injector here. And if you guys saw the text, I had to remove this just to make it easier because installing this thing is a pain in the butt. So, you know, it's you know, maybe you could take some notes. It's a quick little press fit. It's not, you know, anything dramatic. It's actually quite easy. There's a lot of flex at the fuel rail and the injectors. There's a lot of flex between those 3 components. You have your front, your rear injector, and then the actual rail that you have that feeds it from the fuel tank. So once again, I decided to clean up all the flanges, the intake, just to kind of, you know, clean them up. I already cleaned up the heads. Why not clean these up as well? Grab the O-ring or the cushion, whatever you want to call it. Make sure it's tapered. The tapered side goes towards the intake, so the thicker side is facing your heads. So pretty simple, pretty easy. Transferring these parts over, making sure they're clean. If you want to port these openings, you can. So if you're thinking about porting the intake manifold, this is where you could do it. All right. I was watching some videos. I was debating on doing it myself, but you could probably, you know, take off a little bit, maybe 2/1000 of an inch from the intake, port them, and it should allow you a little bit more airflow, and it's going to give you a little bit more performance. But I didn't do it. All right, so you could, you know, see from the manifold, they're actually pretty thick material. And so what I'm doing here, you could see I am lining up the little openings on the manifold with the openings on the flanges. So it's just to make it a little bit easier. But I think at the end you're still gonna have to adjust the flanges, because I mean, it's really tough to kind of get it to go in there freely. You still have to line up the flanges on the rear, or the opening on the rear. You can see on the front we have an eyelet or whatever, a hole, and then on the rear it's like a U. So you have to line up your Allen bolts, where you can see on the back of the heads, you can see those 2 Allen heads are sticking out from the ports. So, and then obviously right here I decided to remove the injector, trying to squeeze that through, not gonna happen. So I had to just remove it, and then I was gonna install it after. So not a big deal, just stuff that you kind of, you know, pick up on and realize and see how, you know, this is gonna go about. So remove, you know, you got to move that wire out of the way, and make sure you're not pinching anything, obviously, and you know, just make sure everything's nice and clean, and try not to leave stuff on top of your heads in case something falls down, or like a socket or whatever. Try not leaving any of that stuff. So this is where I went from the rear, and you have to adjust the flanges anyway. So I thought I was going to be able to give myself a little bit of a head start lining up those openings, but it looks like I still had to you know, go ahead and just adjust it. So this is on the rear of the bike, and once you see everything's kind of lined up and the way it should be, this is when you start just tightening down the bolts just a little bit, just enough to hold the intake in place. We're not looking to 100% crank it down and bolt it down. We're just looking to have just the bolts hold it in place. That way we could adjust the intake to your air breather. That's the proper way to install an air breather. just to make sure everything's lined up and you're not, you know, at an angle, at a bad angle, and then potentially cross-threading the bolt. So you can see I'm moving it, showing you guys it's loose, not fully installed. And then this is, of course, is when we start connecting your injectors, the sensors, everything that you need to connect. It's a little bit easier to go from the rear and then line up the injectors. Of course, they're, like I said, they're flexible. You just push them in place, press them into place, and the O-ring is what actually just kind of holds it in place. You don't have to go crazy on it. You don't have to put a lot of pressure or weight on it. These are plastic components, guys. The injectors are plastic, the sensors are plastic, the connectors are plastic, the air sensors plastic, so you have to keep that in mind when you're torquing down on these bolts. You could potentially break this stuff, so you have to be a little bit delicate. So connecting, of course, the front and the rear injector, we're pretty much, you know, almost at the finish line here. We just got to make sure that all these parts are well seated, because there's no need for these parts to move left and right anymore. So that's why I am cranking down on these components, on the sensors and on the brackets, because I don't have to mess with these anymore. I'm not gonna have to move them around or anything. So the next part, of course, is to install the air breather, because that's what SNS wants us to do after we install the injectors and install the sensor, and make sure everything's nice and tight, not extremely tight, but just, you know, tight enough where you feel comfortable about it. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of the video. This really depends on what air breather you have. This next few parts, I'm gonna just film it so you guys can see what, you know, how is it to install your throttle body and your air breather. Keep in mind the intake is still loose, so you could fully install your throttle body, tightening it up and everything. The throttle body is actually connected to your intake, so there isn't, I mean, you'll still have the play that you need when you're installing the air breather. Not a big deal. So for, you know, this part, of course, I just went ahead and tightened everything down. Make sure these parts go nice and flat. All right, this is something that I always mention in all my videos. It's same thing with like the star pattern when you're tying something down. Just keep on going left and right. You got to make sure the components go down flat. Don't over tighten just one side. You will see in the video where I'm just going back and forth, clockwise or counterclockwise, and you can see I was just down there and then I'm going back down there again. So just that's the proper way to install these parts. You don't want to go one side, crank it down, and I mean, these parts are metal, so there's not a lot of play, and when you go to install or tighten down another bolt, it might be lopsided and you might just potentially break something. So we always have to take our time when we're installing these components. Same thing with just everything, your lug nuts, your wheels, everything that I've installed. You always want to make sure you have a nice flat surface. You want to make sure they're threaded properly. You do not want to crank down on a bolt that's not threading properly, because then you're going to cross thread something and then potentially you'll break that bolt and you'll have yourself another huge project. So you will always see me thread them in place, as you can see right here. You got to make sure, feel that there's no resistance, and then if you feel a little bit of resistance, maybe there's a little bit of Loctite in that bolt, maybe there's a little bit of debris, so you have to, of course, back it out, try it again. If you're having trouble, maybe there is Loctite in there, get some acetone, get something, get your girlfriend's nail polish remover, or if you live in California, then get your nail polish remover and go ahead and just, you know, dab it up a little bit, dab the bolt, put it in there, and then, you know, just clean that out. So once again, you can see that I'm going back and forward. As far as the intake, I install the breather bolts and the intake, the throttle body at the same time. You can see me going back and forth between the breather bolts and the throttle body bolt. So that's pretty much it. Like I said, this really depends on what you have for your setup. You might have a backing plate from SNS, pretty much the same thing. You just keep on going back and forward in a star pattern. Intake, backing plate, and then the breather bolts. And then once we have all of these parts fully seated and installed, this is where you go back and tighten up your intake manifold, and you're pretty much done. You know, just yeah, just make sure everything's tightened, the front and the back, left and right, front cylinder, rear cylinder. And what I'm doing here, of course, same thing. I'm just seating down the bolts and then checking the rear. And then once the rear Allen head bolts are nice and flat, then I go back to the front of the bike and I just make sure everything's nice and tight. And I don't really have a torque spec for any of this stuff. I'm just, you know, just doing it nice and tight. I don't know, maybe I'll post some text up here somewhere if I'm able to find it in my owner's manual. But you know, as long as it's nice and tight, these aren't components that are moving or anything like that. These are bolted, of course, to the engine. So whatever vibration or whatever movement there is, it's you know, it's all flowing together anyways. So there's not a lot of movement. And of course, now I decide to install that last sensor, only because, of course, you have the Allen head right there, and you need all the clearance that you can get to get that that ball joint, that Allen head ball socket in there, because it's really tight. All right, so you guys can keep on watching the video. I have a first impressions on the intake. I'm not entirely sure if it's just because it's adding much airflow or that much more airflow, but I can really hear this intake, this manifold. I can really hear it through the air breather. So I've checked it, see if there was any issues as far as it leaking air or anything. I did the brake clearance test, nothing. So I'm guessing it's just louder. So if you're installing this and you're wondering, hey, is that normal for it to be this loud? I believe it is. I don't know, maybe somebody out there can tell me otherwise. You know, I might be wrong, but I get a lot of questions about my air breather. This is the Trask Assault air breather. The decal is something that I made myself, so I do have quite a few of these stickers, decals. I believe they're stickers or vinyl stickers, whatever. I have quite a few of them, so I've been getting asked about them. So now we're just pretty much finishing up. We are installing the bracket, you know, everything. Just I did add a little bit of Loctite on it, you know, nothing crazy, just enough. And make sure you don't pinch any of the wires, and you have everything well seated like this. Normally I do cover up the fuel line right there. You don't want any debris. Your filter is in your fuel tank, so whatever dirt and grime you get on this nozzle that goes directly to your injectors, I mean, you might contaminate you know, your line. So it'd be a good idea to kind of, you know, just keep it nice and clean, of course. So yeah, just going through it. I don't know, you guys let me know in the comments, what do you guys think? I am thinking about getting a 64 throttle body and intake, trying that out and potentially retuning that. But as far as the performance off of this modification, I don't know if I felt much. All right, like I mentioned in the first impressions video, the SPC pipe made a bigger difference, but I believe the throttle tuner that I just installed, I don't know, maybe it's just throwing me off a little bit off of the feedback from the intake manifold. That could be it. But so here I'm going to show you guys, it's just a tennis ball that's holding the fuel tank up. You know, it's pretty much, yeah, it's that simple, that easy. You don't have to remove the fuel tank. And then you can see that I'm installing the vent line, and then you could also see where I start to lower down the fuel tank, and then we're going to take a closer look at the coupling from the fuel line from the pump. So just line it up. Once you have it nice, flat, and lined up, you have to pull back on that sleeve that you see on the pump, and then it clicks into place. So you got to make sure it got a nice click, and that's pretty much it. You guys can let me know. Thanks for watching. Please like the video. Later.